You don't know flag. You don't know flag.
Welcome to You Don't Know Flag, a podcast full of stories about retro gaming, retro computing, video games, arcade games, and technology from a guy who was there and still is. My name is Rob O'Hara, but for the next 30 minutes, you can call me Flag.
Episode 111. The Gas Chamber.
Hello and welcome to episode 111 of You Don't Know Flag. Episode 111 is late, as usual. They're all late. I should just announce that they're late. I should put that in the introduction, that You Don't Know Flag will be late, so that way I don't have to announce it each time. But I've been traveling a lot for work. I'm doing work right now as a penetration tester, doing some security scans for government agencies. So over the last couple of months, I've spent a week in Chicago, a week in New York City, a week in Denver. Boy, I've just been all over lately, and so when I get back home, I just haven't had that much time lately to work on the podcast, especially with all the other things going on. You can always follow the blog at robohara.com to see what I've been up to and all these travels and things like that. And also, right before the last episode, 110, I launched the Gas Chamber, which is my new forum. And the Gas Chamber is actually going to be the topic of podcast 111. Now, I'm not going to be talking about the Gas Chamber as it exists today in a internet online forum, but rather my old BBS, which was called the Gas Chamber, which ran a long time ago, ran in the mid-90s, and so I'm going to talk about that, a little bit of my history of calling BBSs and running BBSs, and you know what, this is as good as any place to jump right in. So I know you guys have been waiting for episode 111. I've been waiting for enough time to do it, so let's just go ahead and get it kicked off. This is episode 111 of You Don't Know Flag. As I've mentioned before on You Don't Know Flag, I was born in 1973, so I was right at the perfect age to catch the very beginning of the onslaught of home computing. We got a TRS-80 Model 3 in 1980, and we never had a modem for that computer, but as I've mentioned before, in 1982, the price to add 2 floppy drives to that computer was $1,000, and for that same price, we could get an Apple II clone. It was actually a Franklin Ace 1000 was the model, but for the most part, I just refer to it as being an Apple. But so in 1982, we got the Franklin Ace 1000, the Apple clone, and it had dual floppy drives and a monitor. We started out with an amber monitor. My dad didn't like the green screen monitors. He didn't like that whole concept. And amber monitors were the same. It was just monochrome, one color monitor, but the amber was a lot easier to read when you were reading text. So we had the Franklin Ace with the amber monitor and the dual disk drives and a modem. And one of the things I remember early on is that often with the modem, you wouldn't call BBSs. You would just call individuals. Like we would call, my dad would call his friends at work. They would set up a time where they would set their computer to auto answer on a modem, and you would call, and then you could chat. Basically, it was pretty rudimentary. I mean, there was no actual BBS. You were just connecting to someone else's machine. You could chat and send files back and forth. That was about it. And this was mostly, back then, this was definitely taking place at 300 baud, which, if you didn't have the pleasure of experiencing 300 baud, I specifically remember later on my Commodore 64 transferring disks of data and having sending one side of a disk take about 4 hours at 300 baud. And, a Commodore disk holds 664, is that right? Blocks. But when you convert them over, it's like 180K. So if you can imagine, 180K taking 4 hours to download, or, roughly, it was really slow. There was only one, when we got our modem, there was only one BBS that I really remember, and it was run by our local Radio Shack store. And so you could call and leave posts for other people or whatever. But around this area, Oklahoma in 1982, there weren't a lot of public BBSs. Now, that began to change in 1983 when War Games, the movie, came out. There were actually two events in 1983 that kind of changed my life in regards to computers. One was the movie War Games, where all of a sudden, there was this, everyone was exposed to this world of war dialing and hacking into things and stuff. And that, was obviously in 83 at the age of 10, that seemed like a pretty good idea. I mean, other than the whole possibly launching, nuclear missiles and accidentally starting World War III, but that part of it didn't seem like that good of an idea. But, getting into systems and playing games or whatever, that seemed like something that might be fun. And then also in 1983, I'm not sure, I think it started in 82, there was a magazine called Enter Magazine, which split off. It actually started as a section in 321 Contact magazine, and 321 Contact was kind of like the slightly older version of the Electric Company. So, I mean, I guess you would go Sesame Street, then Electric Company, and then you had 321 Contact, which was a little bit more like a science type of show. They would do some experiments. I think there was I don't remember if Mr. Wizard was actually on there, but they would have, they would do little science things. They had the Bloodhound Gang. They would have that would be part of 321 Contact. And then they had, there was a TV show, but then there was a magazine that went with it. And I got the magazine. And in the magazine, there was a small section called Enter. And it got popular enough that Enter became its own magazine. There was never a television equivalent of Enter, but in Enter Magazine, there was a big article about the 414 hackers, which was a group of hackers in Milwaukee that got arrested for hacking, and they were on the cover of Enter Magazine, and it talked all about, there was an article on piracy, there was an article on hacking into things, that kind of stuff like that, and so it just really got my attention at a young age. Now, around that same time, my dad and one of his buddies at work, Tom, set up a BBS in Oklahoma City called PCX. And as far as we know, and it's hard to make claims like this to say that this was, unequivocally the first PC BBS in Oklahoma City area, but it's the first one that we knew of. I mean, when they set this BBS up, nobody else was running one around here. All the boards that my dad was calling at the time were long distance. So he and Tom set this BBS up. And so at a very early age, at the age of 10, I'm now able to call BBSs or a BBS at the beginning. And then other BBSs came soon, of course. And but I was able to get on and post messages and start interacting with people. And the next year, 1984, my dad set up his own BBS called the Backdoor BBS, which was named after the Creedence Clearwater Revival song, Looking Out My Back Door. And it ran at our house on a PC Junior. And so that was my introduction to seeing how BBSs work. Running a BBS was kind of like being the host of the party, if you want to think of it that way. I mean, you were the person that did a lot of the work. You did a lot of the cleanup after the party, of course, too, and taking care of files and posts and things like that. But BBSs in the 80s really predated multitasking. So if you think about my forum that I run right now, the Gas Chamber, it's running on a server that's doing a lot of other things. It hosts other websites, other forums, all these different, things. But back then, if you ran a BBS, if you're running this program, that was it. So, a home computer could cost thousands of dollars back then, and then you had to get a dedicated phone line. Basically, you had to invest a lot of money into running a BBS, I mean, you had to buy a dedicated computer, this phone line, all these things. And then while the BBS was up, you couldn't use the computer for anything else. So there, in the beginning, there weren't a lot of BBSs. I mean, in the early to mid 80s, there weren't a lot of BBSs. So I kind of cut my teeth on the backdoor BBS and watching my dad run that and helping out. And then in 1985, that's the year that I got my own Commodore 64 and my own modem. And so that's when I started calling BBSs. And in fact, when I got my Commodore, at that time we had 3 phone lines in our house. My sister and I had a phone line that we shared, but that doubled as the BBS line for me. I mean, a modem line, for me to call out. And then my dad had the phone line in the living room that was dedicated to his BBS. Plus, we had a regular voice line. So the hobby definitely wasn't cheap, having 3 phone lines. I mean, that was just one part of it, obviously. But one thing I always liked about modeming, and it's true today, even with the internet forums and things like that, is that being online was kind of like this great equalizer. Nobody knew, very few people knew how young I actually was because I typed so well. I typed just as well as a lot of the young adults, that were online. So a lot of people just assumed that I was, in my late teens or even early 20s sometimes. And when I would meet these people face to face, of course, it would be, a complete shock to them how young I was. And even on forums right now, you don't judge somebody by, well, you would hope that people wouldn't do this in, face to face either. But, on a forum, it doesn't matter if you're, what race you are, what sex you are, if you're overweight, underweight, any of those things, because really you're just judged on your, what you say, your words, and how you type and what you say. So, yeah, it really kind of gave me, I enjoyed modeming back then, because you could get on and talk with grown-ups and talk with different people, and, a lot of them just had no idea how young I was. Now, after seeing my dad run his BBS for so long, when I got my Commodore, I really wanted to run a BBS, but, we were going to have to get a 4th phone line or something, or, work out some deal with my sister, and it just didn't work out. My parents weren't willing to buy a 4th phone line for me, But then I met my friend Jeff in 7th grade, and he's actually one of the people that I met that had a Commodore before I did. And so we kind of hatched this plan that I would, configure a BBS and set up a BBS, but then we would run it at Jeff's house, which of course was a great deal for me because, we would tie up his computer and his phone line and all those things, and I would, of course, reap the rewards of running a BBS. But that it never happened. We were never able to run, a BBS over at Jeff's, just for the same reason that we couldn't run one from my house. But that didn't stop us from dreaming about the possibility of running a BBS. So what we would do is download these BBS packages. 6485 was a very popular Commodore one. That eventually became Ivory, which was 6045 but with color graphics. CNET was a popular BBS program as that became Image, I believe. But anyway, so what we would do is we would get these things and we would completely customize them, and so you could go through the BBS software and completely, you would add your own menus and your own color schemes, and every section of the BBS, like if you would go to the message area or the file area or to leave feedback, every one of these areas that you would go to from the main menu would display a page of text before you did it. And especially once we got into the world of color graphics, you could draw these pictures and every BBS would come up with a theme. And so Jeff and I would dream up these themes, like one we came up with was the Fortress of Solitude, because, every BBS had to have some kick-ass name, it was like, I mean, at the beginning, like, you could probably name all kinds of generic names, and people that modem back in would say, oh, I remember a BBS called that, like, the Graveyard, or the Clubhouse, or, the pirate ship or something like that. Those were all very common names early on, and then people got a little bit more creative or whatever. So you would kind of have to and the other thing was that you would want to come up with a theme, like we were going to set up Fortress of Solitude, and then Jeff would be Superman and I would be Lex Luthor or something goofy like that. And then we had one that was going to be called the Wild Side BBS. That must have been around the time of Motley Crue's Girls, Girls, Girls and the Wild Side song, But so we would come up with all these themes and develop these entire BBS themes, and we would draw the graphics and put everything together. So we would do all the work. We would just never run the BBS, But we had a lot of fun doing that, I guess. But the second best thing, if you couldn't be a Sysop, and I may be assuming too much here, but Sysop is an abbreviation. It stands for System Operator, and that's whoever ran the BBS. But many BBSs, along the Sysop was basically, it was a given. The Sysop was the person who owned and ran the BBS, but many BBSs had co-Sysops, and the co-Sysop, his job was to do the work of the Sysop as well, like a lot of the maintenance type things, or uploading and uploading files, keeping the file areas cleaned up, that sort of stuff. Pruning the message areas. That would be things that co-Sysop would do. And of course, and a lot of times co-Sysop was just a tag that you would give your friends. Like when my friend Justin set up his BBS, the Ball of Confusion, then he made me a co-Sysop just because we were friends. So. I don't remember having any specific duties with his board, but that was being a co-Sysop was kind of a way to play Sysop through other people's boards, So you kind of had all the power and all the fun of doing it, but you didn't have all the headaches of replacing hardware when it died, or fixing, recovering things after a crash or whatever. But so I was never, in the Commodore days, I was never really a Sysop, but I was a co-Sysop of probably dozens of boards, Now we're going to jump forward about a decade, and we're leaving the mid-'80s behind, and we're arriving in the mid-'90s. A few things have changed. Modems have got faster. In the Commodore days, I started at 300 baud, moved to 1200 baud, and then in the very tail end, moved to 2400 baud, which was fairly uncommon for Commodore users. But in the mid-'90s, this is about 94 now, 9600 baud, 14.4. Those are the norms in this area. People calling BBSs, and I've been calling PC BBSs, again, this is in the mid-'90s. I've been calling PC boards for a while. What a lot of us found, was that there were kind of two levels of users. There were there's no nice way to put it, but there were the people that didn't take modeming seriously, if you want to put it that way, and then there were the people that were actually, trying to better the scene, if you will, the local Oklahoma scene. There were people that were, getting files from out of state and uploading it. There were people that were moving message boards along. There were the people that were running BBSs, guys that did artwork and graphics and stuff. And so that was kind of like the upper echelon, if you will, of local modemers, And so at this infamous party that retroactively, I guess, became known as the Gathering, the first gathering here in Oklahoma. One of the guys who attended was this guy named Brian. His alias was Yon T, which was a half spider creature thing that in Dungeons and Dragons. But Yon T comes into this party and basically announces that he has this vision that all of the elite users of 405 would band together and create this group. And the name of the group would be the Brotherhood, and the way that the Brotherhood would work would be that everybody would scratch each other's backs. So the guys that could do fancy artwork, ANSI and ASCII graphics and stuff, would do that for everybody who was in the Brotherhood. And the warez guys would get software and spread it to all the people in the Brotherhood. And so that was the idea. And that's eventually, I mean, that little speech was how the Brotherhood, or TBH 405, how that kind of came about. Now, Jan T, and he was friends with a couple of guys named Prong and Lefty. And Lefty was the Sysop of a board called Magic Rat University, or MRU. And Magic Rat University was pretty popular, but one of the problems with Magic Rat University, and what ultimately began to separate the men from the boys, if you will, was hardware. For a board to get popular and stay popular, you had to have hardware. And if you were doing wares, you had to have drive space, you had to have faster modems. Later on, you had to have multiple phone lines, for people to connect in. So, and Magic Rat University didn't have any of those things. It was a slow board. It didn't have enough drive space to run, wares and stuff like that. So it was a popular board, but it was kind of falling behind, Now, in the fall of 1994, and this is after the Brotherhood had already been established, I founded Souls at Zero, the horror lit group, along with The Stranger. And The Stranger ran a BBS called Where Shadows Wait, which became, it was the home of Souls at Zero, just because nobody else wanted to be it. And so we did a lot of stuff through Where Shadows Wait, but Where Shadows Wait, The Stranger wasn't really involved with the Brotherhood, so it wasn't really a Brotherhood BBS, and The Stranger was really into writing horror literature, which didn't really fit into what those guys wanted to do. So I saw this opportunity kind of presenting itself that the TBH needed a big system to call itself, to call it home, and I thought, what, I'm the guy to do that. So in the April of 1995, I launched the Gas Chamber BBS. The way that I got the hardware for the gas chamber is kind of funny. At the time, or shortly before that time, I had been working as a computer technician at Best Buy. And this is like before Geek Squad, when they just had a little service window and they had one or two computer repair people that worked there, and I did that. And this lady came in with a old computer, probably a 4-year-old machine at that time, and this is late 94, maybe early 95. And she brought this machine in and said that it was dead and that we needed to fix it. And, the resources that we had were really limited. Basically we had whatever was in the store's inventory at our disposal, but that was about it. So I take this machine apart and I look at it, and it is a HP, actually it's not even an HP, it's a Packard Bell 386-16. So in 1994, this is pretty old. It's probably a 4-year-old machine. And I try to boot it up, and the CMOS battery is dead. So I thought, well, that's an easy fix. And I open it up, and the CMOS battery is this proprietary little box that connects to the motherboard. And I know immediately we're not going to have anything like that, So I call the manager over, and I'm like, I can't, repair this machine. And this lady pulls out the warranty that someone has suggestively sold her for about $30 that says it's a 5-year warranty, and if we can't fix it, we'll replace it. And the manager, he's asking me what to do, and I said, this is a proprietary battery, and we might be able to order it from Packard Bell, maybe not, I don't know. And so ultimately we this lady got a new machine out of the deal, and this piece of crap Packard Bell that wouldn't even boot got dropped off, and the manager told me to get rid of it. He didn't ever want to see it again. And I asked him, I said, could I take it home? And he said, I don't care what you do with it. I just don't ever want to see it again. So I took it home and sat it on my shelf. I didn't really know what I was going to do. I probably had it in the back of my mind at that time that I was going to run a BBS off it. But machines were hard to come by at that time. It wasn't like now where you could just go to a thrift store and, pick up a machine for 10 or 15 bucks, or, for a project thing like that. Machines were going to be several $100s. So this was, even though it was, outdated at the time, it was still a good find. So I took this machine home, and then I immediately rigged up my own battery. I used the Packard Bell proprietary battery connector, but I put my own battery in it and soldered, the wires up to it. And so I had a working machine, and I bought a gigabyte hard drive, a 1 gig drive, which sounds ridiculous now, right? A 1 gig drive. My phone has way more memory than that. Probably my toaster has more storage than that, But during the time I worked at Best Buy, I'd watched drives. When I started there, we sold a 220 meg hard drive. Was the biggest drive we sold when I started there. And then I watched them go to I don't remember what it was, 370 maybe, and then 420 and 540. And just watching the sizes, and it was almost like, with anticipation, we were watching the drives, and it got up to 730 and 850, and I said, they're going to hit this gigabyte ceiling or whatever, and so they did. We were watching the orders coming in, and then eventually it said that we were getting 2 1 gigabyte drives, and so I reserved one, and my boss reserved the other, and the price was $999. So it was basically $1 a meg, which was a good price, really, at the time. And with our discount, I remember I paid $575 for that drive. So I got this 1 gig drive, and I got this computer, and came home, got it all set up. And back then there was a problem because BIOSes wouldn't even see drives that big. So you had to use a thing called Disk Manager, or we used to call it Disk Mangler. But you would install it on the hard drive, and then it would trick the BIOS into seeing a drive that big, because BIOSes weren't built to handle seeing a drive that would be, 1 full gig. Who could have imagined? So anyway, I take it home, and I load it up, and I talked to now my wife, Susan. We were just roommates at the time, and I told her that I wanted to run a BBS, and she said, that's fine. And we were living in a mobile home at the time. She was working as a secretary at some drug company, and I was making $6 an hour at Best Buy. So it wasn't like we had money to throw around. And plus, I just bought this hard drive, but I did talk her into getting a second phone line strung to our mobile home, which is kind of interesting in itself, because you have this little phone pedestal out back, and the phone people have to come, and they run wires from this pedestal to your little trailer. But so April 95, the Gas Chamber goes online, and then I kind of went back and looked in preparation for this, and in the May issue of Souls at Zero, it announces that the Gas Chamber is the U.S. headquarters for Souls at Zero. And that was another thing that a lot of people did was, with groups or whatever, you might have your world headquarters or your U.S. headquarters, or maybe even the regional headquarters, which was all crap, basically, but it was a nice way to where you didn't, 2 people could both run a headquarters or whatever. So the stranger, his was the world headquarters, and then mine was the U.S. headquarters of Souls at Zero. And then it was also listed as the world headquarters for Sith, which makes sense because I ran Sith, which stood for Sick in the Head Easy, and then it was really what Sith was a, and it could be a podcast of itself, but basically it was my attempt to be the cult of the dead cow. I had just, in 1994, I attended HoHoCon, which was kind of the predecessor of DEF CON, and it was held down in Houston by the cult of the dead cow, and so I was really into reading all their text files and everything at that time, and so I decided that's, I was going to do that when I came back. So that's what Sith was. But also, around that time, if you go back and I can look at the logon screens, I still have captures of a lot of this stuff. But the Gas Chamber becomes the world headquarters for TBH 405. In fact, in the TBH 405 newsletters, the Gas Chamber they start calling it the TBH motherboard. Now, around this same time, I changed jobs, and I left Best Buy, and I moved to the government help desk that I worked on. And my salary doubled. I went from making $6 something an hour to $12 something an hour. So all of a sudden I have a little bit more income, and I start pumping it into the BBS. Now I already had the gig drive, and this computer case, if you can imagine, I mean, it was like a kind of a small scale desktop. It wasn't a tower computer case. So it had a spot for one hard drive, one 5 1/4 drive, one 3.5 inch, 5 1/4 floppy, and a 3.5 inch floppy. When I had saved up enough for another hard drive, I pulled out the 5 1/4 floppy, which was fairly dated by the mid 90s. I still had some, but I wasn't really using it day to day at that point. So I pulled the 5 1/4 floppy drive out, and I mounted a second hard drive there. And when I saved up, enough money for a third hard drive, I pulled out the 3.5 inch drive, and I mounted a third hard drive there. And then eventually I mounted a fourth hard drive on top of the power supply with duct tape. And the top of the case wouldn't even screw down anymore with that fourth hard drive on there, but didn't bother me. I just kept adding hard drives, because that's what people wanted. You had to have the drive storage, Around this time at work, I got access to a CD-ROM burner. It was a 1X CD-ROM burner. The CD-ROM burner, most people don't even remember burners that were this archaic, but our burner was SCSI, and it was an external unit that had a CD-ROM burner in there, and it had a SCSI hard drive. So what you had to do was, the hard drive was used for staging. Before you burned a CD, you had to copy everything you wanted to burn over to that hard drive, and then it would burn from that hard drive to your actual CDs. And me and my buddies Jeff and Johnny went in. We bought a 10-pack of blank CDs, and it was mail order, and it cost us $100. And then we split it. So I got 4 of the blanks, and Jeff got 3, and Johnny got 3. So I paid $40 or whatever. And figured out that, after people had uploaded so many things, I could pull a hard drive out, take it to work, copy it over to this burner, and back it up to a CD, and free up, drive space for more uploads or files or whatever. And around that time, I ordered a 6-disc changer for my computer. And it was this big external box, but you could load 6 CD-ROMs into it. And it came with a DOS driver, so I would, boot up my machine, and it would count, hard drives, C, D, E, and F. And then it would go through the 6 CD drives, G, H, I, J, K, and L. But I could map all of those drive letters inside the BBS software. So then I began, just putting the CDs in those. And then I could, claim that much more drive space. So at some point, I had 6 or 7 gig online, which was almost unheard of. It was one of the larger local systems for sure. Now the problem became that the BBS got too popular, and the phone line was tied up 24/7. People would just have the number on auto dial, so the minute someone hung up, the next person would connect in, and there was, people were always downloading, and I always wanted to get the message bases going more, but I had so much drive space that the focus was more on file transfers, uploading and downloading, So eventually I added another modem and another phone line. So now I'm living in a mobile home, and the phone people are coming out, and I've got 3 phone lines running to this trailer, and I'm sure they're wondering what in the world's going on, with in my trailer, run some kind of bookie business or something. But so then I got 2 phone lines, and what I would do is, in the beginning, I would switch the second phone line back and forth between the BBS and my main computer. So if I wanted to dial out, I would use the third phone line, and then when I wasn't dialing out, I would plug it back into the BBS, and it would be available, so I could have 2 callers, on the board at the same time. And then after a while, it got to where the two lines were just pegged all the time. And so if I needed to dial out, we would do it on the main phone line. So I remember getting into a fight one time with Susan because she needed to make a call, and I had 3 phone lines tied up at the same time, which in her defense was not the agreement, that we had come to. So, but for the most part, I just stuck to, the two phone lines going to the BBS. Now, one of the things you run into when you run a BBS, and especially when you're dealing in, gray matters like maybe software or, I don't know what all. I'm sure there's things that went on the board that I had no idea about. But you make enemies. You make people, either they're jealous or, you rub somebody the wrong way. In fact, and this is probably something I could do an entire podcast about, and maybe in the future, but I invented a fake co-Sysop named Mr. Moonpie. And Mr. Moonpie was in reality a giant stuffed banana that we had picked up at a garage sale, but nobody knew that, So Mr. Moonpie was the person that would do all my dirty work. In other words, if somebody needed to be kicked off the BBS or whatever, then I would have Mr. Moonpie do it. Or if someone needed to, be reprimanded for something, Mr. Moonpie would do all that. And so then when people would talk to me about it, I would say, boy, that guy, I don't know, he's kind of a loose cannon. I could just kind of pass stuff off, as this other person. And there was a small circle of people that knew that Mr. Moonpie wasn't a real person. But Mr. Moonpie kind of, grew. He had his own little cult following, and that may be a topic that I talk about at some later date. But, so yeah, but you end up with these people that either take advantage of you. I had people, in the early days, I didn't have what was called a file ratio. And a lot of people implemented these, like myself, because people would get on the BBS and just download for hours at a time and never upload anything. So, you could instill a ratio to where people and you could do it either by file size or file numbers. And I did like a file number. So, if you uploaded one file, you could download 5 files or something like that, And then I caught people that would get on there and upload music collections of MIDI files, which were really small, and they would upload hundreds of them. And then they would tie up my BBS for days, downloading programs. And so, Mr. Moonpie had to deal with that, kick those people off. But one guy that got rubbed the wrong way was this kid named and I didn't know that well. He went to HoHoCon. I remember seeing him there, and was more into like the anarchy stuff and writing viruses and dumpster diving, like that whole kind of scene. Like, it wasn't really my. I'm not going to say that I didn't dabble in some of that stuff, but this guy was pretty serious about all that. Someone apparently, and this is, I'm just going to preface this. This is stuff that happened 15 years ago, and I've kind of pieced it together based on my own memories and going back and reading text files and putting together, what happened. But someone called BBS and set up a fake account and sent a message to the Sysop, which was something you could do. And in the message it said, that the FBI knows what he's up to and that he's going to be turned in and all this stuff and get ready to be busted and your days are numbered, and it was signed from the Brotherhood of 405. Now, I can tell you that nobody directly involved with the Brotherhood of 405 wrote that message. I mean, we didn't care about people like that. All we cared about was getting games and playing games and drawing pictures and drinking beer. That's what we wanted to do, But, his reaction was to come back at the headquarters of the Brotherhood of 405, which was my BBS. And so he called me, just, literally yelling at me, and I didn't even know what was going on, And he started telling me that, he was calling the FBI. He was going to turn me in for all the stuff that was on my BBS, and just threats that kids make to each other. But I took it seriously, and so I started cleaning up the BBS and locking down who had access to what, and it kind of created this big stir, and I think my people talked to his people. I don't know how it worked, but somebody talked to somebody and calmed him down and convinced him that that it wasn't us that left this message. But it was still like, after that, I didn't really trust the guy. You know what I mean? Like, once somebody just flies off, you're always, in the back of your mind, you're like, well, they're going to fly off the handle again if they get mad, or are they still mad and they're just pretending like they're not mad, or whatever. So anyway, a few months later, I had this. Remember, I talked about Yanti. We had this party, and it was called The Gathering. Well, we had multiple gatherings, and I hosted the Gathering 4. And one of the people that came to the Gathering 4 was, and so we're having this party or whatever, and leaves, and the party was in just like a block from my house, so. And then after the party, we have to stay and clean up. So I'm there for several hours. And I remember thinking, when I get back to the house, I bet there's going to be a bunch of posts about the party, about the Gathering 4 on the BBS. And so I get home, and there are no posts. No new posts, no new calls, anything on the Gas Chamber, And I thought, well, that's weird. I didn't really put it together at that point. But later I try to make a voice call, and I can't make a voice call. And so I go out, to the tombstone where our phone lines come from, and they're okay. And then I start tracing it back, and right outside the back of the trailer where the phone lines came into our house, all the phone lines had been cut. And it wasn't like, it didn't, of course it was high up enough that it wouldn't be like a lawnmower or, even a weed eater or something that would leave a jagged edge. It's obviously, they've just been cut through either with a knife or scissors or something like that, And so, I immediately pointed the finger at and he denied everything and said he had no knowledge of it, knew nothing about it, and, I haven't talked to the guy for 10 years, but the last time I talked to him, he still said he had nothing to do with it. And at the time, I didn't believe him. And then after a while, it didn't matter. It didn't matter who did it, really. Somebody did it. And I felt like it was associated with that. Maybe it wasn't, but there's always that next level. And it was like, stuff had just increased to the next level at that point. Like, you get online or whatever, and people hurl insults, and that happens today with forums or whatever. People get on and call each other names and this and that. But then there's that next level, and the next level for me, then people were, like he had called my house, and I was like, why is this guy calling me? So that was like, escalated it to one level. Then when my phone lines got cut, that was an all new level. That's people coming to my house and doing stuff to my house, and I thought, I got to get out of this, And so that was, for me, that whole incident was like the beginning of the end, where I wanted to kind of get out of this whole thing. I still ran the Gas Chamber for a while after that. I ran it up until the summer of 1996. I started getting online on the internet in the fall of 94 and very early of 95, So I saw the competition between the internet and BBSs, but I didn't see that the internet would just kill BBSs dead. And in fact, I wrote an article, I don't even know why I wrote this, maybe for a BBS or something, and it's dated September of 1996, and I actually have this article because I save everything, I was going through old CDs, and so I'm going to just read this. In fact, I haven't even read all the way through it yet, but I remember writing it. So Anyway, this is an article I wrote in September of 1996 called Full Circle. When I first started modeming, I knew that this was the end. There would be no more football games on hot summer nights. There would be no more staying up late at night watching television. For several nights, which grew into several summers, which grew into several years, which has grown into almost a decade for me, there would be an electronic frontier to navigate, the world of BBSs. I started out where everyone else did, calling an entire list of BBS numbers that were printed in the local computer magazines. Mostly FIDO boards, the type of boards where sysops list their real names and give you access on the first call. I wish I could say it was on the PC scene, but I started on an Apple, moved to Commodore 64s, and didn't move to the IBM world until my dad bought a PC Junior with a 300 baud external modem. I met cool people. I met jerks. I met weirdos. I met people that I never wanted to talk to again, and I met some of my best friends, people that I still talk to today. After paying my dues, people began to know who I was, and I worked my way into the underground scene. Frankenstein's Lair, for those of you who remember it, ran on CNET 10 and had been totally rewritten to look like a graphic adventure. Groundbreaking antsy at the time. I made some connections back then, and soon I was as underground as you could get. I was pretty full of myself writing this article. Times passed. BBSs I learned came and went, as did aliases. Some of my friends quit modeming, others just changed aliases weekly. For years, I did what other people in the scene did. I started calling long-distance boards and spreading my name. I started making groups before I could even crack or anything. Just joining with other modemers. I started modifying the heck out of Renegade BBS, preparing for the day that I would become a sysop, drawing poor ANSIs and changing the name weekly. I collected wares for years. I dabbled half-heartedly in the freaking hacking anarchy scene, half-assed trying things and reading things. The wares scene has always been me, regardless of what else came along. And then, one day the internet appeared. Within a matter of a couple of weeks, it seemed like all my BBS friends began gravitating towards the net. And before I knew what happened, people were talking about web crawler instead of terminate, Yahoo instead of Zmodem, and IP addresses instead of new user passwords. People could be whatever they wanted to on the net. It was huge and fast and had color. That's funny, I would say that they had color. Yeah. People loved the net. Well, they did for a couple of years. I remember a day when BBSs were for computer people, not just anyone with a modem. And likewise, I remember when the net was for computer people, not just anyone with a free AOL disk. Sure enough, though, just when my friends and I had just enough bandwidth for us and our friends, along came the PD punks, I guess that's public domain punks, who made web pages for no reason, tied up Yahoo with their preppy searches, and surfed from dawn to dusk, slowing the net down and local providers all to hell. And one by one, completing the circle, my friends and I have grown tired of the net. Sure, it's a great tool and a great place to pick up new wares or easily locate information, but for a place to chat, hang out, talk to people that we know, there's no place like home. I've seen a massive increase to my BBS lately, thanks to net burnout. I think people will eventually return to their grassroots and remember where they came from. Hopefully all the lamers and kiddies, referring to how they act, not necessarily their age, will gravitate towards the net, leaving our local BBSs once again for computer people to hang out and BS from the comfort of our easy chairs once again. Jack Flack. September 1996. Well, Mr. Flack, it didn't quite work out that way, did it? I don't know, there's a few funny things in here. I love finding old things that I've written throughout the years and how seeing how wrong I am on certain things. So what I had hoped for didn't happen. What I had hoped at that time, I guess, was that the internet would be so easy to navigate. And, this is a thing, people bring it up all the time, but it's really tough to understand. But in the early days of modeming, when you got a modem home, you probably weren't going to get it to work that day. Modeming took a lot of work to get things, in the early days, to get things configured. And everybody thinks they had it rougher than the next generation. I remember, back when not all modems were compatible with all terminal programs, and trying to get, even later than that would be all the DOS problems of getting, your COM ports and IRQs and things like that working on your modem physically for it to work. So, I go pretty far back. Each time that the technology makes things easier, it lowers the bar, so to speak. The entry level gets easier. And so year by year, it became easier, which means you got dumber people, more or less, And so I think when I wrote that, I was just, I was hurt that I had run this BBS and it had grown so quickly and so big, I'd put all this money into it, and immediately when the internet came along, everybody ran to the internet, and man, I was a holdout for a long time. I ran that BBS, and this is a really funny thing, and it really shows where my head was at the time. When I go back and look at my BBS directories, and I remember doing this, I was using the internet to, and I just recently had this conversation with a friend of mine, Boring Beige Box, shout out to Matt. Well, we just had a conversation where I was telling him that I used to use the internet to download software to put on my BBS, so it wasn't like everybody, it's a weird thought where, I was still trying to keep new content and compete with the internet, which obviously you can't do, but I was trying to compete with that. So, when I had those two phone lines, like I would use one phone line and go out and find these, and it's weird stuff that I was into. I guess that was stuff that you could find easily, like song lyrics, or Star Wars files, or like weird directories of graphics that I'm sure I must have just found FTP sites, that would have this stuff available for download, and I would download it all and then put it on the BBS and promote it and say, hey, the Gas Chamber, and now we have 8,000 Star Wars pictures, and then hope that would line the people up. That's what was going to save the BBS, was downloading public domain crap off the internet and sharing it that way. And obviously it didn't work. That fall in '96 I moved to Washington, and they didn't have the same BBS scene, obviously. I mean, it was whatever they had up there, and I just never got into it, and I wanted to talk to my old friends, and the easiest way to do that was on the internet through IRC. And so that's what I did. I never put a BBS back up there, and it's funny, when I was out of Oklahoma for a year and a half, and when I came back, I remember setting up a BBS, and this would have been the spring to summer of '98, and I set up a BBS, and I don't remember how long I ran it, but it was months, like maybe 2 months, something like that, and nobody called. I mean, I'm sure one or two people called, but it was just like it happened that fast, where 95 and 96, it's the biggest thing around, and then it's gone for a year and a half, and then come back and I'm begging people to call it, and that's it. It was just over that quick. And I kind of feel like, I don't know what's better. If it would have been, would it have been better to not have moved and watched it slowly decline? That would have been the alternative. But what I did was, there was still, some BBS activity going on. I moved for 18 months, and when I came back, it was completely dead. It was like I missed it. It's almost like, this is a strange comparison. I'm going to give you that in advance. But like when a friend you haven't seen for a while dies, and then you're like, wow, I didn't get to say goodbye. I didn't, I never got to get that stuff back I loaned him. That's jerky. But you know what I mean? Like, it's just that there's no closure, and so that I always kind of felt like that with the BBS, was just that it just kind of went away when I wasn't looking, and but anyway, that was the Gas Chamber. I felt like when I put the Gas Chamber up, I'd been preparing for that moment for a decade, maybe longer, you know? I mean, I dreamed about running a BBS, and when I put it up, man, it was just 110%. I spent so much time and money on that BBS. And I could lay there at night. Now, I've heard people that were into it more than me. I couldn't do what some people did, but I could definitely tell you if people were like downloading or if they were in the message areas or whatever, based on the sounds of the hard drive. And the BBS was set up in my bedroom, you know, in the trailer, so I could lay there at night and hear people on, and based on the sound that the computer was making across the room, I could tell you, you know, even with the monitor off, I could tell you what people were doing. And especially when they start going through the CD-ROM drives, and you could hear it, you know, each drive would make a chunk, you know, when it would go through, and then you would hear it spin up when it read the directory, and then if they were reading multiple files, it would sound differently than if they were, you know, browsing all the things. But it was weird, just, you know, I used to do a pretty good impersonation of a modem tone, you know, and I don't know, it just went away. But you know, the world today, forums and that kind of stuff. You know, one thing, I don't know that if you weren't regular on BBSs, you may have forgot this, but we had email, but unless it was on a networked BBS system like Fido or something like that, you had to call the system that the person had left you mail on. So, you know, there was a time where I was a member on 50 or more BBSs. So if somebody left you a message, you know, I might not see it for a week. It wasn't like email where it just, you know, popped right up. You had to, if somebody called a BBS, they left you a message there. You didn't get the message until you called that BBS, you know. So conversations and information moved a lot more slowly than they do now, of course. And don't get me wrong, the technology of forums is a lot better. You know, I've had several people have suggested to me that I should, when I started talking about wanting to set up a forum, that I should set up a telnetable BBS, you know, and do that. And it's just, you know, it's so much, the forums, I mean, the free forum software that I've set up now for my forum is so much better than, you know, anything that we had on the BBSs. It handles text better. I don't know, just, you know, the technology has increased. And so, yeah, it's that kind of nostalgic rose-tinted glasses. I don't want to go back to BBSs anyway. Forums work pretty good, I guess. But, you know, with the podcast, and I feel scattered a lot. I don't know if you feel that way, but I feel like, you know, there was a time when I was updating 4 or 5 different blogs. RobO'Hara.com has always been my primary. Well, it hasn't always been. The very first one I set up was at LiveJournal, which I still have. Now, most of the blogs that I have now are basically just being updated automatically. I update RobO'Hara.com, and then it automatically updates. It automatically posts to Facebook, and it automatically sends to LiveJournal, you know. But there was a time when I was doing all that manually, and Digital Press and Atari Age, 2 forums I'm on, both had their own blogging system, and I was manually doing those. And then I set up my own. I set up a different blog. For a while I had 2. That seems greedy. But I had tech.robohara.com because you know, I've done this weird thing, and I don't know if it was a good idea or it wasn't even intentional, but somehow I got all these groups mixed together. So, I mean, on my subscription list on my blog, I have, you know, members of the Cult of the Dead Cow and my grandma, you know. And so when I post to the blog, you know, everything that I post, I always realize that there's some people that are going to like this and some people are just going to be completely confused. And depending on what I'm writing about, you know, I mean, I don't think these, you know, all these hackers out there or whatever don't want to read, you know, about my 4th of July parade float that we built for the kids, and my grandma doesn't want to read about, you know, updates to Nessus or whatever. So, anyway, I just started getting this feeling like that, the scattered feeling like, I have some people reading what I say on Twitter. I'm Commodore on Twitter, by the way. And then some people that only read the Facebook, and some people that only read robohara.com, and some people, and I have, I really have taken a liking to Twitter, and it's not for the reason that most people do. I'm not using it as like an updating type thing, but I kind of use it as like a challenge of what's the funniest thing I can write with 140 characters, that kind of stuff like that, or like a couple of times I've posted haikus, but I try to hide them to where people won't see that they're haikus, So I just kind of do little fun stuff on Twitter, but I don't know. What I miss, I guess, was home. Like the Gas Chamber, the BBS was my home base, where if people wanted to find me, they could come there. And if people want to see what I'm up to, or what projects I'm working on, or what's going on in my life, they could go to robohara.com. But that's good. It's easy. Blogs, especially WordPress, are an easy way to see what's going on in someone's life this week or right now. But it's hard to see, what overall projects are they working on, or this or that. I just wanted a place to be home again. So that's why I decided to set up a forum. I set it up, really as this is funny, in Commodore, and this is just in a few years. Commodore came out in 2006, and in the front it said, if you'd like to find me or whatever, come get me and it lists my MySpace account, My second book, Invading Spaces, came out in 2008, and I remember thinking, I can't believe I put my MySpace account on the first book. Why wouldn't I put Facebook? But I wasn't on Facebook in 2006, and now, right now, it seems like, well, gosh, just put the Facebook. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, well, in 2 years, what will be the next big thing? Will it be Facebook? Will it be something else? So it just kind of seemed like setting up my own forum, that was a landing place, and anybody could come there, and you could go there, and it's not totally like my old BBS, and some of the people have moved on, and it's hard to get people back into something that they left a decade ago. I understand that, but now I have new friends, and the people that have shown up to my new forum, which is the easiest way to get to it is just go to thegaschamber.robohara.com. And the Gas Chamber is all one word, thegaschamber.robohara.com. But the people that have showed up there are my new friends, I'm not saying that's the only people I'm friends with, but it's just a new generation, a new group of people, and so I like that. And it just gives me a place where I can talk about my projects and the things I'm working on and stuff, and it could kind of be a home base, and as I continue to release books and publish books and all that kind of stuff, it's just a place where I can post that, and everybody will be able to find it there. So that's the history of my old BBS, the Gas Chamber, my old history with BBSs, and what led me to put up a forum called the Gas Chamber today. I know that I say this, but on the Gas Chamber forum, we've set up a thread of topics that people would like to see in future podcasts of You Don't Know Flag. And so you could go in there, and if you've got ideas for a podcast subject you'd like to hear me talk about, you could just go on there and post it. And I've got about 15 or 20 ideas on there, and people have kind of voted for different ones that we have, and I've actually juggled different ones around, based on what people want to hear. So if you have input on that, head over to thegaschamber.robohara.com. As always, you can get the podcast at podcast.robohara.com, or you can just visit www.robohara.com, which will get you links to everything, and that's the home of the blog. But I'm pushing the time limit on this one, so we're going to wrap up episode 111. I will see you guys in a few weeks for episode 112. It is I think today we hit 107 degrees here in Oklahoma. It is hot as blazes. I have no reason to be outside or doing anything else but sitting inside my home right now in the air conditioning working on podcasts. So that's what I plan on doing. So, hey, to everybody that's come to the forum, to everybody that listens to the podcast, everybody that's supported me in any way, I just want to say thanks. I really appreciate it. And if you want to email me anything about the podcast, you can email me at podcast@robohara.com. But that's it. I can't think of anything else to plug or wrap up. That's episode 111. I will see you. What month are we in? July? We're in mid-July. Around the 1st of August. Maybe the first full weekend of August. We'll shoot for episode 112. So, anyway, thanks again. I really, really mean that. And I will talk to you soon.